Have you ever wondered how educators and community members can support immigrant families, undocumented youth, and individuals with DACA? That's exactly what this podcast is going to explore. Join us to learn more about these topics, listen to our guest stories, and explore resources to support students and their family. I'm your host, Dr. Gerardo Mancilla. I immigrated to the United States at a young age and am currently working as an associate professor of education. This is the Educators and Immigration Podcast. Hello and welcome to another episode of Educators and Immigration. I'm your host, Dr. Gerardo Mancilla. As listeners might remember, I am a part of the steering committee for MISOL Advanced Parole Study Abroad program. I haven't had an opportunity to release news episodes in a while because we were coordinating 2 MISOL cohorts last semester. We were very fortunate that the participants had the opportunity to travel back to Mexico to reconnect with their families, their histories, and their identities. As we move forward, I'm planning to continue working on releasing more podcast episodes and continue having important conversations about immigration and our current state. And it's important to think about how to continue supporting our students, our families, and our communities. There are many changes that are happening every day, and it's important to continue having these conversations to learn about the resources that can help us with immigration. Today, we'll be speaking with Matt Gale, who is the Chief Strategy Officer at Lawfully Inc. Lawfully is an immigration technology company that helps to track and analyze the process of an immigration or visa case. This episode is not being sponsored by Lawfully, and I want to be transparent that I have not personally used the application. I have done research on it, but do not actively have a USCIS case number to be able to track within the application. Matt joined Lawfully about a year ago and is serving as a Chief Strategy Officer, where he works on improving the immigrant experience. Previously, he served as a transformational and strategy leader at BAL, a major immigration law firm. Prior to that, he was the EVP of Consumer Products at Simple Citizen. Matt works to build products and designs to enhance the immigration and mobility experience for many people. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Gerardo, for having me.
And so usually the first question that I start with is asking the guests if they could tell us a little bit about themselves and anything that they would feel comfortable sharing with the public.
Yeah, definitely. Really grateful to be on the podcast with you today. And over my career, worked with lots of international students and international educators. So feeling grateful to share a little bit about what we do and a little bit about my story with these folks, because I don't get to interact with these folks as much as I would like. I spend a lot of time with immigration lawyers. And so I definitely enjoy when I get to spend time with international educators. I'm from Utah. And I started my career working in immigration because I went through the immigration process with my wife, who is from Costa Rica. We met during our undergrads. We were both studying at BYU. And at the time, this was back in 2000, this is in 2014 or 2015, saw a company pitching at some of the, BYU has a pretty good startup ecosystem and a culture for building and growing companies. And so I went to one of these pitch competitions and I saw this company, Simple Citizen, and they were pitching their idea of automating green cards and citizenship, sort of like a TurboTax type solution for going through the process. My wife and I had just gotten married, or we were planning our wedding. And so I was like, oh, we got to use that product. That's so cool. And they ended up winning the audience award, and they got the top judge award at that pitch competition. And we didn't use it immediately because it was brand new. It was still a prototype at the time. But a few months later, we ended up signing up and using the product. We were some of the very first people to use the product when it launched. And a year later, when I decided I wasn't going to pursue a career in investment banking, and I wanted to join an early stage startup that worked in an area of impact that I cared about, I ended up joining the company. And I was one of the very first employees there. I ended up wearing nearly every hat there is to wear in a scaling startup, and experienced all the highs and all the lows of building a company. And after about 5 years, we were acquired by the largest immigration law firm in the world, Fragment. And this was in September of 2020. I stuck around for about 9 months after the acquisition. And then I left and I was working on a few of my own projects and I was consulting in the immigration space. And one of the companies I was consulting for was Barry Appelman and Leiden, or BAL. They're another leading corporate immigration law firm. They started out as a San Francisco firm working with a lot of the tech companies. Today their headquarters is in Dallas. I stayed in Salt Lake, but I would travel to Dallas every couple months. But after about 3 years being there, I was really missing being at a startup and building product and working with a small team. And so I had known June, the founder and CEO of Lawfully, for a while. I've been very impressed with the product that they had built and the scale at which they had been helping immigrants. And so when there was the opportunity to join the company and lead a few initiatives, including expanding the product into B2B and selling to immigration lawyers, I jumped on the opportunity. My wife and I hopped in a U-Haul and we moved from Salt Lake City to New York City. I feel proud and grateful to have had a career over the last 8 years helping support all kinds of immigrant populations. I've worked on products at this point that have helped millions of people to achieve legal status and simplify aspects of their immigration journey. And although we're maybe in a difficult era of immigration, I feel hopeful for the future. And immigration has made this country what it is, and it will continue to do that.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing the background as well. As you mentioned, each immigration process has their own application, their own timeline, and their own way of making sure you kind of are waiting on the government to kind of figure out where in the process you are. And I think we're going to be talking more about this, but it seems like a lot of these companies are working on how do we facilitate that, or how do we make that more accessible for the communities in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of shared a little bit about where the passion comes from. So I don't know if there was anything else that you wanted to talk about as you think about working with immigrant populations and thinking about enhancing this experience for people. Was there anything else that you wanted to add in terms of, like, you kind of shared it in your introduction about where it's personal for you, this work is personal, and you're also trying to think about how do you make it a better experience from the mobile experience too?
Yeah, so two core experiences come to mind. So obviously, being married to an immigrant, having gone through the green card and citizenship process with her is deeply personal. And the reason that I started working at Simple Citizen, and the reason that I knew Simple Citizen as a product, and that it was an area of impact that I cared about. But there are a few other things that really drew me to immigration. One is I lived in Mexico for a few years, from 2011 to end of 2013. And I met so many amazing people, and I fell in love with Mexico. I try to go back once or twice a year. I've gone back every year since 2016, except for 2020. And so I spent a lot of time in Mexico. But while I lived down there, I spent a lot of time just in folks' homes, getting to know them, getting to know their families. And I met a lot of people who experienced deportation. And, growing up, you maybe think that people that are getting deported are criminals, or that, I don't know, you have assumptions, and we're seeing that today. But when I went down there and I met people that had experienced deportation and had really negative experiences with CBP and border enforcement and everything, it was just heartbreaking, because some of these people are the most amazing people I have ever met. And so when I moved back to the US, I sort of had just a drive to be able to help improve the process and support people that maybe were born on a different side of an imaginary line, and, means that your life can be very different. And so when I started my undergraduate education, that was sort of core in my mind every day. And the other thing that I was thinking of is during my undergrad, I met a woman from Afghanistan who came to the US on a medical visa and applied for asylum. And she experienced persecution by the Taliban, and the Taliban actually killed her father. And I remember I helped her through different stages in her immigration journey, including preparing and submitting her asylum application. And I remember I was with her. We went to dinner the night that Trump was elected, and we were driving back, dropping her off where she was staying. And we all just like start crying when he first got elected, because we're like, man, what is this going to mean for asylees and for refugees? And so that moment was one of those moments where I was like, man, I want to go all in on doing whatever I can to improve the immigration process and to be able to help folks. And for the last 8 years, I've been doing that from a technology perspective.
Thank you. And as you mentioned, also thinking about people's strengths that they're bringing, immigrant strengths that they're bringing, their lived experience, and also how the policies and practices are set up in a way that you have to, even to try to get a visa to the United States, the standards are so high to be able to even just be able to get a visa to the United States. And then thinking about each of the application processes, once you're even in the United States, how hard it is to try to find a pathway for adjustment of status, or how to find a pathway. Right now we have humanitarian parole, TPS, like all of those that they're constantly changing. But thinking about all that process, that how complicated it is and how much information somebody needs to know, and to be able to go through each of those processes too.
Oh, it's so overwhelming. And especially, add on if you don't speak English, and all the government forms are in English. And now the White House doesn't even, they're not even publishing things in Spanish.
So language barriers, how that also becomes an issue too. And so in the introduction, I kind of mentioned that you're currently the Chief Strategy Officer for Lawfully. Mm-hmm. Can you share more about the company itself? What does the company do? I know part of it is the application, but there's a lot more that it offers. Can you speak a little bit more about Lawfully?
Yeah. So Lawfully started in 2019. June, our CEO and co-founder, he is a physicist from Korea, and he worked at a national laboratory for 15 years on assignment at Princeton. And his wife is an immigration lawyer, and she's also one of the co-founders of Lawfully. She runs her immigration practice, but he started working on these projects around big data within physics of, creating visualizations, running big data models. And he said, man, could we apply this to immigration? He had gone through the process himself, and he said, could we do predictive big data models in immigration? So that's sort of how Lawfully started as a side project. And ultimately, as it was picking up traction, they incorporated, built a mobile app, and it evolved to support people with tracking their immigration cases and also offering peer-to-peer comparison and visualizations. And so launched on the App Store in 2019. And today we've helped over 2 million people to track over 5 million cases. And we have a community where people share their journey, their timeline, and encourage one another. Because some of these different categories, you might have a 5, 6, 7 year wait, especially under VAWA. Like some of these folks are waiting a long time, and it's like such a joyous moment when they finally get the green card. And we also have an attorney marketplace, so people can book consultations with attorneys. We've got about 40 or so attorneys on there, and low cost and pretty easy process. And we even have some attorneys that have slots at like midnight, 1 a.m, because we have a few that just are like, they're digital nomads and they travel the world and do consultations on Lawfully. So that's cool to see that people can book a consultation live at 1 a.m. It's a product that's made legal access a lot more accessible. And one of the things that I've been working on for the last 9 months is we discovered that there were over 2,000 folks on the mobile app that were tracking 20 or more cases. A few folks were tracking hundreds, and we even had a couple that were tracking thousands. And so I called all these folks and I said, hey, like, tell me about you and about what you're doing and why you're tracking so many cases on our mobile app. Folks that are helping people professionally, they're law firms, they're nonprofits, they're universities, they're corporates that are filing for their employees. And so we decided to build a solution for individuals that do professional immigration work. And we built that last year, and we launched it end of summer, and we've been working on getting it in the hands of these organizations. And that's what I've been spending a lot of my time doing. And so in terms of my role, I lead sales and go-to-market, customer success, and I support a lot of the other teams, and especially product.
Thank you so much for sharing all the different resources that are available within Lawfully. And just so I make sure I understand it correctly, what it does, it aggregates all the users that it has. And then based on the different types of application from the users, it kind of says, if you're applying for this kind of petition, it would be approximately this amount based on the users that we have using the same kind of application. If you have a different kind of application, here's what it would look like. And so is that correct in my understanding of kind of like how it aggregates the data, kind of looks at what are the trends, and then it's able to share that back with the users themselves?
Exactly. So, for example, my wife got citizenship in 2023. We submitted I-130s for my mother-in-law and my father-in-law. And so I'm tracking the I-130s on the Lawfully mobile app. You probably can't see that, but they can sort of see it. And so under her I-130 and under the IR5 category, with a filing date of March 12th of 2024, processed at the National Benefits Center, there are a few hundred folks that are using the Lawfully with that same criteria, right? So we've got about 400,000 to 500,000 folks every month that are using the app. But under that specific criteria, there's only a few hundred. Under certain criteria, there might be thousands or tens of thousands. And so I can see where I'm at compared to other Lawfully users. A few folks are in the receive stage, a few folks are in the interview stage, and then some folks are in the decision stage. And actually, I think she may have gotten an update on her case. That's the nice thing. So, it takes a while. Like USCIS doesn't always send out emails or texts when there's an update. So our updates are very comprehensive. It looks at both the latest update as well as the history, and it's in near real time. And so you're going to get an update super quickly. I talked to so many people that they got notified of approvals and of other things on the Lawfully mobile app before they knew from their attorney, before they got the letters, and before they got any update from USCIS. Because it's tedious to go in and check the portal all the time. And the portal is very basic. It's not going to tell you where other folks are at and what the trend looks like. So it's very helpful for people, like reducing that black box and giving people a little bit more transparency and insight.
No, thank you for sharing that, because I think as I was trying to do the research on it and understand it, that's kind of what I was understanding. And also the notifications, as you mentioned, how it also pushes notifications based on the applications that you're tracking too, so that you get them to your phone the same way.
And it's not just USCIS, it's also NVC. So for folks that are applying from outside of the country, and we're working on adding immigration court right now. And so by the time this podcast is published, we will likely have immigration court, because immigration court, tons and tons of people are submitting applications for asylum and other things. And so a year ago, immigration court was like a backlog of 1.5 million. And today it's like 3.6 million. And that's just going to go up and up throughout the Trump presidency.
Thank you so much for sharing all the information about the application and the services. Is there a cost to the app? And if so, are there additional features that people would have access to if they have like the pay version versus the free version?
Tracking is free. And so anyone can download the app and add their case to track it. On the free version, there are a couple advertisements. We try not to overwhelm with advertisements, but we do on the free version, we have some ads. On the paid version, that's where you get the deeper analysis and peer-to-peer comparison. And you get like an expedite template. You have the opportunity to submit like a written, you can do like a basic written consultation from some of our immigration experts. Everyone has access to our support team if they have questions or concerns. But if you want like deeper support from an attorney, then you get that under the premium version. And then the consultations, the video consultations with the attorneys on our marketplace, that has a cost. And the attorneys, they set their cost. But some of the attorneys set their cost as low as like $40. And we just take a small cut of that, like a platform fee.
Thank you so much. And I just want to be transparent about like all of the costs as well with applications. And so as you mentioned, this is one of the applications that's helping with all the new changes. You mentioned court hearings kind of being added to it. And now with the executive orders, there have been more changes happening at the national level. Mm-hmm. One of the recent changes in immigration today has been the cancellation of humanitarian parole. Would you be able to speak about what are like the next steps that people can take, or what are some alternative options that people can take?
Yeah, so we've been seeing a trend recently where there is a huge uptick in filings these last couple of weeks, because people are really terrified about what the next 4 years are going to mean for them. And they're trying to lock in a more durable and long-term status. So if you're citizenship eligible, you're submitting for citizenship. If you're green card eligible, you're submitting for a green card. If you're undocumented, but you're TPS eligible or asylum eligible, then you're submitting for those. And so, filings across the board are going up. And especially for some of these categories that seem to be at risk. And we've already seen a few of the categories that have just been ended, like humanitarian parole. Under the Biden administration, they approved over 500,000 folks on humanitarian parole. And these are folks that they got U.S. citizen sponsors. And they went through a legal process and they have work permits. But the Trump administration has ended this program and has put out an order to put these folks in expedited removal. And so if you're on parole and you get pulled over, especially in some of these states where they've deputized officers to become immigration officers, then you need to be prepared that, we haven't seen it yet, but according to these orders, like they're going to put people in removal proceedings. So that means that folks need to find a longer term, more durable status. And so if you're on parole, then folks should be trying to file for asylum. Or if there's some other form of eligibility, if they've married a U.S. citizen since they arrived here, then they need to file an adjustment of status. I'm not a lawyer. I can't offer legal advice. None of this is legal advice. It's just based on, my experience having seen thousands of people go through the process. But that's the nice thing about Lawfully is like people can download the app, they can book a quick consultation, and they can say, hey, this is my situation. What should I do? A lot of people, they don't use lawyers in this process. 80% of people don't use lawyers in their filings. Of the 2 million applications that are filed every year, only 20% have lawyers. And so if you plan on doing this on your own, an asylum application or an adjustment of status application to get a green card, it makes sense at least to consult a lawyer, ask a couple questions, be a little bit more prepared in your filing, especially for asylum. Folks that have lawyers for asylum cases, the approval rate goes up like 3 or 4x.
Yeah. And I would agree with you that having a lawyer, having a consultation with a lawyer as the immigration laws are changing consistently is being able to check in with a lawyer and see if there's any other pathways that might be available too, based on everybody's individual situations and different pathways too, that one of these immigration pathways might be open. Unfortunately, sometimes it has to do with if they've experienced violence, for example, then a different pathway might be possible too. And so it's important to be able to consult with a lawyer if possible on any of your situations to see if there's any pathway for adjustment or for a different pathway to move forward with it. Thank you so much for sharing that information as well. And you kind of already referenced this, but this idea that there's so many types of immigration, so many types of visas applications that come through both the USCIS as well as NVC. And so do you have any trends that we could think about as how things are taking longer? I know that, for example, last year, immigration cases and all the different applications were taking way longer than expected. Are there any general typical trends that you've been noticing as you kind of been looking at all the data that has been coming through?
Yeah, so under the Biden administration, we saw big improvements in terms of processing times. At the beginning of the Biden administration, post-Trump administration, first Trump administration, wait times were really long, and they brought those wait times down significantly across the board. And another trend that we saw is RFE rates. RFE rates across the board as well were very low under the Biden administration. And we're definitely going to see those things start to tick back up. And this is going to be across the board. I don't know the exact number of RFE rates under the first Trump administration, but even on the skilled visa side with H-1Bs, it was very high. And we are hoping to start publishing some insights and data around this because obviously we can look at the RFE trends and we can see how they've changed over time. We have hundreds of thousands of people that are adding their cases every month. And so that's something that we want to keep folks really in the know throughout the Trump administration. But we're going to see processing times start to go up, not only because the USCIS and these different government agencies are going to scrutinize more in their America First agenda, but we're also seeing an uptick in filings because of what I just said about people locking in the next best status. And there's just going to be more filings and not enough adjudicators to process these cases, especially as we've got the Department of Government Efficiency trying to cut people's salaries, lay people off, et cetera. So I'm sure it's going to get a bit hectic among all of these different agencies that are involved in the immigration process.
Thank you for sharing that. And I know you also shared about some of the other additional resources that Lawfully offers, such as finding a lawyer or immigration resources. One of the other things that I noticed in the research was about mock interviews. Is that something that people can still do with Lawfully?
Yep. Former government officials that did interviews, whether on the NVC side or the USCIS side, you can book a consultation with them and you can do a mock interview, and they can sort of walk you through what you can do to improve and to optimize your chances for
And that would also be part of like the paid part of it, the Lawfully, right?
Correct. Yeah. Those are one-time fees that you pay to most of that fee just goes straight to the individual, the lawyer, or the official, the former official who's doing the service. And we take a very small platform fee.
And that's part of like the consultation that's happening with the professionals to be able to provide that service.
Yeah, exactly.
And you kind of mentioned this already, but USCIS has a form called G1145. That's the e-notification of application and pending acceptance. And I believe that's the one that you kind of fill in to kind of say if you want a text message or an email notification on your case studies. Can you talk about like the similarities and differences between the notifications that come through USCIS and Lawfully?
Yeah, so USCIS, they have a government portal or an online portal where you can go and you can enter your case. You can also make an account. And then if you fill out the G1145, then you get these text messages as well. It's very basic. And I would say it's not super comprehensive. And so you'll get a text that says there's an update on your case. You click into it, you can log into the portal and you can see the latest update. And we noticed that it doesn't go out for all of the updates. And when you get on the portal, it doesn't show your case status history or anything. And so we found that people prefer to use Lawfully and get push notifications and be able to have the deeper peer-to-peer comparison and the comprehensive insights. But some people still choose to just rely on the government portal, and that's fine. But what we focus on is doing what we can to improve the experience and make sure that people are getting value and feeling like they have more insight and transparency into the process.
Thank you. And so we've been talking about a lot of different supports and resources that are available for people, specifically talking about the technology and how to integrate technology into this whole process to be able to facilitate it and keep up to date with everything that is happening. Are there any additional resources that you have found to be helpful for people who are processing an immigration or a visa application?
Yeah. So on our side, we've got a community board. People can get on the community and they can learn from one another. We publish resources regularly across all of our social media channels, YouTube, as well as on our website, resources, help center tab. But outside of Lawfully, I'd say there are some immigration lawyers out there that are putting some really great content. Greg Siskin is one of those. He is updating the lawyer community nearly every day on LinkedIn and across socials. So following the different lawyers that are very boots on the ground, I find extremely helpful. And then, the different nonprofits that are very involved in helping folks throughout this, I'd say they are going to be even more involved over the next 4 years.
Thank you. And you mentioned your social channels as well. These are going to be linked in our show notes. And so I just wanted to make sure I mentioned the Lawfully website is www.lawfully.com. The Instagram handle is lawfully_official. And then there's also a Facebook page that's Lawfully Tracker within the Facebook one. So I just wanted to make sure I mentioned those as the social handles and different ways that people can stay engaged with Lawfully as well. Was there any that I was missing? And the YouTube channel.
Yes. Yeah. The YouTube.
Yeah. So I just wanted to make sure I mentioned them, and we'll have them on the show notes for people to be able to follow up and follow them on social media as well.
And if folks want to connect with me, they can add me on LinkedIn. You can just search Matt Gale and I've got a blue photo on there. And so happy to connect with anyone.
Thank you. What advice would you have for undocumented youth, students, and families?
Taking the time to explore eligibility. I hosted we sponsored an immigration hackathon last night that was put on here in New York by a close friend, Andy. He did like a really great job there. You're divided in 4 different categories of coming up with different ideas to help support the immigrant community. And I was leading the legal vertical. And a young guy came in and told me about his experience growing up as a first generation Mexican American. And he said that for his mom, she would always ask him to review legal documents, to review the mail. And I think this is a really typical experience for a first generation immigrant in America. And he was just sort of ideating with me about different things that he could do to solve this. But as I was talking to him and asking him about his situation, it sounds like his mom, so he's a U.S. citizen, over 21. And so she's eligible, but you have to go through certain hoops to be able to obtain the long-term status. And it sounds like they are doing that, and at the same time exploring other alternatives. And I would say, like, for anyone out there that is undocumented, they're on DACA, they're on parole, they're on TPS, maybe they don't have any form of work authorization, like, explore your options, talk to an attorney, and come up with a strategy, a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, because you don't want to get pulled over, especially in some of these more aggressive states, and have nothing to be able to demonstrate to these officers. You want to do whatever you can to put yourself in a position where the officer cannot detain you and or put you in removal proceedings. And if that means you've applied for asylum and you have an active case in immigration court, then like you have to go through that process. If it means that you've submitted something to USCIS to try and obtain some form of legal status, you're in a process. And so better something than nothing, even if it seems like there aren't that many options.
And I would echo that idea of talking to lawyers, because sometimes, as like you mentioned, sometimes people think that when their kids are 21, that they definitely can petition for them. But then there's also other additional requirements that they have to make sure that they meet. Mm-hmm. And then knowing what those requirements will be as well. And also with advanced parole, one of the things that we were always talking about was the lawful entry as well. So how do you get a lawful entry into the United States as well, or being able to acquire something like that would later on will open the doors for you to be able to adjust the status through one of the various pathways that might be available too.
And I'll add that, if you aren't eligible for anything, then know your rights. And I know that there's the red cards being circulated across immigrant communities. In one of the recent executive orders, I think it's the one for the moving parolees to expedited removal, it says if these folks are amendable. And so, like, what does amendable mean? I don't know, but I guess it means like people are volunteering information. People are not exercising their rights. And so if you ever encounter an ICE officer or an officer who is supporting ICE and immigration enforcement, then know your rights. And under the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution, you do not have to answer their questions. You do not have to let them into your home if they do not have a warrant.
Warrant signed by a court judge, not a warrant signed by an officer of immigration as well. So even knowing those distinctions between the two types of warrants that might be presented as well.
Yes. Yeah. And they'll try and trick you. They are not, they might pretend like they're on your side. They are not on your side. They're going to try and trick you. And so know your rights. The tarjetas rojas, they're circulating all over. And so download it on your phone or, print it out and save it, put it in your wallet.
And I also know that there's many community organizations that are also putting together the Know Your Rights workshops and trainings, both in Spanish and English, and hopefully in other languages too, so that make sure that different communities know about their rights. And there's also additional steps that families can take to make sure that they could be prepared also. So I know that one of the conversations that we've been having is about power of attorney letters as well, to make sure that the parents can have those set up, and financial situations or financial, I think they call it an agent, right? So they're claiming an agent that can be the financial sponsor if anything happens, to be able to have that all in writing and different processes that can be set up. And I think that some of the community organizations have been really active in trying to figure out how do we get these kind of supports or these kind of resources available for the different communities. And I should also add schools to that too, because some of the schools are also doing this kind of work too, and thinking about how do we make sure that we continue supporting these kind of initiatives to make sure that all of our our communities are protected and that we are prepared as well with the different kind of processes that we might need to take place as well. So as we think about immigration at the larger frame, it's always changing. There's new policies always happening. But one of the questions that I also like to ask guests is what other conversations are missing as we think about supporting immigrant communities? What are some other topics that we might not have covered yet, or that might be topics for future podcasts that we could cover in? Are there things that come to mind for you?
So I have a friend, Sagnik. He is a content creator here in New York and also owns a production agency, a production company and an agency where he helps content creators. He's helped to build a couple of YouTube channels. And I saw he just posted yesterday or the day before where he's actually interviewing someone from Congress and asking them questions about their thoughts on immigration. And working in immigration every day and doing what I can to support this community through technology, it's empowering, it's exciting. Sometimes it's discouraging because I just think, man, like I wish the laws were different. Like I wish there was a pathway to citizenship for the 11 million undocumented people, honest, hardworking people living in this country. I wish there were a pathway to citizenship for dreamers, for parolees, for folks on TPS. I know so many of these folks that they're my friends, they're close colleagues. And so like, I think the biggest thing really is like, we got to get the laws changed. And how can, right now, I think we're in a dark period when it comes to perceptions around immigration, but it will not stay that way. And the more that we can change perceptions publicly, while at the same time helping lawmakers to express their true opinions and understand the value that immigration brings to this country, the closer we are to changing those laws. Whether that's talking to lawmakers, whether it's doing something like that interview, whether it's, going to the Capitol, whether it's, forming a local nonprofit to try and change public perceptions in your community, whether it's doing events. I think that's the biggest thing. Immigration laws haven't changed since the 60s, or at least comprehensive immigration laws haven't changed since the 60s. We've made little modifications, but that's too long. We're coming up on 70 years. Like the world has changed a lot in 70 years, and it's time for comprehensive immigration reform. We're probably not going to get it under Trump, but let's hope for a better future. And I'd love to see in 5, 6, 7 years to see some serious comprehensive immigration reform.
And that also reminds me that oftentimes people say, like, what can I do? How can I help? What are some action steps that I can take as well? And I think one of the ones that comes to mind is also if you don't have the time to be able to volunteer, for example, you could make sure you donate to the community agencies and the organizations that are doing this work, because I think that, as I mentioned, they're trying really hard to make sure that they make all these services available for all our communities. And so financial supports are always encouraged as well for any of our community organizations that are doing this work.
And I think, especially for folks that lean more conservative on this, speaking to like the economic impacts of immigration, it's powerful for business leaders. It's like anyone understands that, and that's why I think NAFSA has focused so much on the numbers and showing the value and support that international students bring to America. And so I think if more of those conversations are happening, and it's maybe less confrontational and more just, hey, like more immigration means better economy. Like who's going to disagree with that?
Yes. And also acknowledging that immigrants do pay taxes too, and they are contributing members to our society as well. And so I think that that's another misconception that people often say, oh, they're not paying taxes, but yes, they are paying taxes as well.
Well, if it weren't for especially the undocumented immigrant population, Social Security would likely collapse, because they pay in and they don't get the benefit back. That's one of and there's all like a bunch of little examples like that throughout immigration that are just like injustice after injustice, and it's time for major reform.
I agree with you 100%. Well, I want to make sure, Matt, that I thank you for your time and for sharing with us about Lawfully, as well as many of the services that it provides, as well as having this larger conversation about what are the changes that are happening in immigration today, and how can we find resources, and how can we be prepared to continue working for our communities, with our communities, and alongside with our communities as well. So thank you so much for your time and for coming to the show.
Thank you so much. It's been such a great conversation.
Thank you. And again, just for our listeners, there's many extra steps that you could take as well. All the information we posted is going to be posted on our show notes as well. But thank you so much. Thank you for listening. And I hope you have a good rest of your day. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Educators and Immigration Podcast. You can find out more information about us at www.educatorsand'immigration.com. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share our podcast with your family, friends, and colleagues. You could also leave us a review and rate us on Apple Podcasts as well as Spotify. Thank you again, and I hope you have a great day.